What is up, YouTube? Coach Kolton here. Big double bicep for the camera. Anton Ratushnyi. We'll just go with Anton. You guys might have seen this dude. He just won his pro card at 19 years old in classic physique. One of the youngest to ever do so. Jeff Side, back when men's physique wasn't necessarily men's physique, won his pro card when he was 19 years old. But really outside of that, he's rivaling some of the greats, even Arnold Schwarzenegger, for instance. So what makes this individual so unique that he's so highly successful at such a young age? I mean, 19 years old to win a pro card. Some people are doing this their entire lives in bodybuilding and still haven't won a pro card. Let's break it down in this video so you can take a little bit away from him and maybe apply it to yourself. Anton is from Ukraine. That's really important to state because Ukraine is maybe not the best infrastructure to grow up in. I don't actually know his history, how long he lived there, when he transitioned into more of the United States area. I don't know the whole situation, but he was from there initially at some point. He's 5'11", 240 pounds, a pretty big dude. And to get this completely fathomed in my head, I had to reread it probably 3 or 4 times, but he started his whole journey at the later years of 15 years old. I started lifting when I was 14, and granted I won my pro card in the PNBA when I was 20. It's not even in the same league. So what is Anton doing that is so different from everybody else that's making him this genetic absolute monster? Well, obviously it's not gonna be just meat and rice. There's some gear or substances being used in this case. I don't know if he claims natural. I don't think he ever has personally, but if he did, that would be outrageous. He's definitely not natural. So my biggest curiosity then lies in, when did he actually start using hormones? If he started at 15 and won his pro card, not his first show, but his pro card at 19, meaning he was competing shortly after turning 18, he must have started gear pretty young. So why was he so successful, like everybody does, using steroids and training hard and probably eating a really good diet? I mean, you yourself probably watching this do something quite similar. So how young was he when he started performance enhancing drugs, or gear? And for those of you who don't know, gear means basically steroids, if you'd like to use that general population term. I don't necessarily love it because it has some pretty bad and negative connotations, but I don't think people really understand the brevity of what steroids really might mean. Nonetheless, I think he really had to have started pretty close after turning 15, maybe 16. The reality is the pro card wasn't the only show he's done. That was one of his shows. He's done many shows where he won before that. Likely, probably before he even turned 19, or at least started preparing for his first show before he was 19. So he likely started using hormones at a very young age, and some of you might think that this led to his success. But what was he using that's so different? Because again, most bodybuilders in the space, and maybe even you watching this, are using some form of performance enhancing compound, or likely many. And I assure you that probably a lot of us, including myself, haven't obtained results as fast as Anton did, nor would we likely ever. Well, to be honest, nobody is gonna know what cycles he ran. Even if he tells people on social media what he did, there's a very high probability that he is going to lie about it, as almost every single person does who talks about what they did. They're retroactive, low-dose users, or even natties. But if I was to assume what he's doing and have any sort of general awareness as a coach who's coached hundreds and hundreds of people, I would assume it was just a simple test, a bit of DHT like primobolan, which for those of you who also don't know, DHT stands for dihydrotestosterone. Back in the day, they made therapeutic drugs based off this molecule where they modified the carbon chain and basically changed its structure to make drugs like masteron or primobolan, which are widely used today in performance enhancing situations in basically every sport, country, and worldwide. So I imagine he was likely using a bit of testosterone, which is our natural endogenously produced hormone, but we can inject it exogenously, which is a normal therapeutic that a lot of people use at probably around 75 to 150 milligrams a week. But in this scenario, you're probably likely going to be using quite a bit more, somewhere on the scale of 350 to even 1 gram of testosterone per week is really not that unheard of. And the same thing can be said about the DHT-derived compound. Something like masteron or primobolan would likely be ran at 300-ish to 600-ish milligrams per week in this individual. Again, I don't know what he's running. This is just an assumption based off of what he looks like right now. Generally healthy, has a full head of hair, and I would assume he kind of has some pretty strategic guidance, at least in the background, on what to do and why to do it. And in conjunction, because he has this generally healthier look about him, I would assume that he probably started off using growth hormone a bit earlier than most people as well, just because the growth hormone in and of itself is going to help you grow more muscle through JAK-STAT pathways, which are genomic transcriptions, and also obviously just mTOR, which would therefore reduce the need for more anabolic steroids, things like hormones, which I talked about, those DHT derivatives or testosterone. And in specific, those hormones are the most detrimental to our health and can represent themselves through the most oxidation, which physically represents itself as the most skin aging, also hair loss promoting. So my assumption is that maybe he was leveraging a little bit of a lower dose of total androgens and a higher dose of growth hormone. Probably a total dose of somewhere around 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams of total anabolic steroids at any one given time, and likely 4 to 8 IUs of growth hormone. Again, this is a complete assumption, but generally what I've seen historically, this makes sense. So now the question lies in, if you ran this cycle, would you get the exact results? I mean, would you realistically, in 4 years' time, be able to get a physique that achieves you a pro card? Sorry, the answer is definitely no. One has to realize that in a situation like this, a person's genomic makeup is very, very important. In other words, what genetics you were born with is going to dictate your success in bodybuilding almost entirely. There is a vast array of different genomic sequences that relate to muscle building. For instance, we know of exactly 53, which again, there's likely way, way more, but 53 as of right now, which independently react with one's ability to put on muscle or make more myonuclei, which again further enhances how much lean mass one can have just in a state of being. So if those stars align in an individual and you're able to connect the dots in forms of genomic sequencing for optimizing muscle growth, you get an outcome which is Anton. If you took 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams of total androgens and 4 to 8 IUs of growth hormone, likely, sorry to tell you, but you wouldn't experience the same results as this individual did. Genetics, again, are the sole variable when it relates to bodybuilding and building an amazing physique. I, as well as maybe you, have seen people at the gym running way more than what I've mentioned here today and look honestly like they don't do anything. There's many, many people in this world right now, probably at your local gym. I would argue 1 in 3 people who are at your gym using some form of performance enhancing drugs who don't even look like they've ever even done so, let alone lifted a weight. And this is solely based on the premise of them not having, one, probably enough discipline to do anything that's worthwhile and just looking for a shortcut at the end of the day. You're looking at an inefficient series of genomic sequencings that just don't let that person build as much muscle as the next guy. But the question still stands because likely he did start gear very, very young. I mean, he would have to have been in high school still. Do you need to get on gear sooner or younger to achieve a greater greater amplitude of results. I'm certainly not recommending that anyone goes to do that, especially if you're young and not experienced in this realm, nor if you don't have a professional guiding you. But I do think that as a younger individual, your body is slightly more robust and could tolerate a higher burden of drugs better than maybe someone who was a decade or so older. I also think from the standpoint of making maturation happen at a really healthy and good rate, doing things younger is going to be better in the longer term. You see, if someone blasts and does a massive hormonal cycle when they are 19 per se, versus when they are 30 years old, their body is going to be a lot more robust and able to handle that systemic burden better than it would be at, for example, 30 years old. So one could realistically shorten the time horizon it takes to get to the optimal result that they have in their mind, whereas the other one maybe played it safe and exposed themselves to drugs for a decade or more and still hasn't achieved that result. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, if you start out early, you definitely achieve more results much faster, and therefore at the end of your career, you might be able to stop getting that excess level of hormones in your body much faster, which would then relate to long-term health and maybe an earlier and more successful career, versus the guy who took his time, was very safe with things, and took very small doses in anabolic steroids and other compounds and waited until he was 40, 50 years old to have a physique which he was proud of. Because at that point, he's basically already withering away and fighting the clock, and there's not much he can do to be competitive. Whereas Anton now is likely for sure getting several $1,000s worth of contracts from supplement companies and clothing companies per month, as well as social media blowing up recently has led to 100% income, and I'm sure he's living large on that. But the cool thing is if he plays his cards right, this is the beginning of his career. This is the very conception of it. He still has easily another 10 years to go before he's 30 and could make well over millions, I mean millions of dollars if he does this thing appropriately by the time he is 30. Whereas another person who's 40 years old and just getting to their peak isn't necessarily an attractive person to have on social media. They really couldn't effectively sell much, and I don't think many companies would be interested in sponsoring or paying somebody who is in that age demographic to do anything for them. So in a way, yes, starting earlier is maybe better if we're looking at long-term career length, but I also think that there is a lot of downsides. Obviously, as far as our brain structurally still maturating, we need to consider the fact that androgens, which I've talked about in many previous videos, have a massive effect on your cognitive function, and specifically are very neuronally degrading. You see, his brain isn't yet developed yet, and now he's exposing himself to super physiological doses of androgens and who knows what else. The combination of those two things leads to someone's brain being quite underdeveloped, a very large amygdala region, and a very small frontal cortex, which can lead to probably a lot of issues. And I don't want to put things into reality that aren't necessarily happening yet, but you could imagine what this would do to a person. So there's gives and there's takes, like there is with any extreme. But the moral of this story is, could you get the results that he's achieved yourself by mimicking what he's done? And the answer is absolutely no. You would have to absolutely be a clone of him in a one-to-one match to get anywhere near the results that he got. And two, is starting a cycle earlier better? Well, it's subjective, and it depends on what your term of better really means. If your term better means that you're not submitting yourself to a lot of neurotoxicity, then it's not. For sure, it's not better. But if your term better is maybe shortening his total career length and exposure to performance-enhancing drugs, therefore the long-lasting health effects that they might actually induce, then yes, it could be better. But I'm curious on what you guys think. Let me know down below. I'm actually wanting to know, maybe I missed some details here, but I seriously think that he wasn't doing anything extreme with his cycles, training, or diet, but maybe you guys have some insider information, and I'd love to see that in the comments down below. If not, just shoot this video a like so it pushes us into the algorithm and exposes us to more people. And I will catch you in the next video. Deuces.